Okay, so where we left off, we had created the backdrop, we had made some minor adjustments to make those backdrops basically be in the same place, and we've created a cube, we made it editable, deleted half of it, and put it in a symmetry object so that we can start editing. So when we do this, we just want to make sure that we are actually editing the part of the object that we want to, rather than the symmetry, right? We shouldn't be able to click on the symmetry, so there's really only these points here available. And now we started in points mode to do that deletion. What we want to do at this point is we want to move to polygons mode, because we're going to use a tool down here in this bottom row called Extrude. And we'll talk about what that is and how to do that in just a hot second. So in order to go to polygons, to edit the polygons, we got to select polygon mode. And then we should also go ahead and select our live selection tool again so we can get those options back up, because we're going to want to uncheck only select visible elements. Right? In this case, if I was to, here, let me leave that unchecked and just show you what happens. So, right, if I was to try and select this polygon with only select visible elements unchecked, then I've unintentionally selected the other face as well, right? And we want to be extruding from one face at a time. And so I'm going to check only select visible elements. I'm going to click, in order to deselect in Cinema4D, you just have to click off in space where there's no geometry. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and select this polygon again and see which face it's actually selecting. And we just really need to decide if we want to extrude into the back of the ship or the front of the ship first. And I'm in the mood to start with the nose. So let's go ahead and rotate this view around, select this polygon, and then from here we're going to use the Extrude tool, and we're going to start by using it in the right view. And so we can just we can extrude a little bit down the body of the ship. And we'll talk a bit about all of the things that we need to do in order to make these adjustments. Now, I just realized that before we do any extrusion, there's one other thing that I want to do, which is to actually select the polygon on the bottom surface here and bring this up so it's actually closer to the body of the X-wing, because otherwise we're going to have to come back in and make a series of adjustments that we would otherwise not need to. So let's rotate this view down below the ground plane, and let's select this polygon here. Sometimes even with only select visible edges or only select visible elements checked, sometimes it does sneak around a corner and grab another polygon. So it's always good to check. And now once we've got that selected, we can just come down to our right view, and we can just click on this blue arrow that's going down and just drag this up until it's even with the bottom of the X-wing. Now, the other thing that we might want to do at this point is we know that this corner is already too far above the top of the cockpit, and so we want to bring this edge down, right? And once we do these two things, then we can begin to do the extrusion. And so what I need to do is I actually want to switch to edges mode, which is up here. And once I've switched to edges mode, now I can highlight and move edges. So I'm going to select this edge, and you'll notice that the edge, the orientation is not oriented with the world, right? These axes are different, and if I click and drag this, it's going to wiggle all over the place, and I really want this face to remain straight. And so the question is, well, how do I switch that mode so I can actually have this axis in the right place? The answer is to use this tool next to the XYZ at the top. This says the coordinate system. Right now it says use the world object coordinate system. If I click on this, right, use the world objects coordinate system. So what does that mean? With this little box, that means I'm using the object coordinate system. And so this edge is aimed essentially 45 degrees, up. And we don't need to worry about why that is, but that is the case. If I switch this way, it's going to switch us to the world coordinates, so I can still move this thing along the normal axes. And so all I'm going to do is hover over this white arrow. I'm going to click and drag until that's about even with the front of that cockpit. Okay, so now that I've done that, I can go back to Polygons mode, and I can select this. I can deselect everything, and then select this front polygon face. Now, once I've done this, and you'll notice the corners are, these edges are also, you know, not quite where they need to be everywhere else, but we'll fix that here as we go forward. So I've got this selected. I'm going to come back down to my right view, and I'm actually going to make this full screen for a little bit, just to make it a little easier to see. And something else I might do is actually go to my options and go down to configure, and I'm going to reduce my transparency, oops, even more, right? Or increase my transparency, right? It's kind of in most programs they call it opacity, and you actually reduce the opacity, but in this case we're increasing the transparency. And I'm going to go up a little bit further, which hopefully will make this a little easier for you to see. And then I'm going to go down to the bottom, and the Extrude tool has a keyboard shortcut of the letter D, and you can also just select it down here. And what the Extrude tool does is it allows you, it has several ways that it works, but what we're going to do is we're just going to basically click and drag, and what it does is it creates new geometry when you pull this face out. So instead of just stretching the one polygon we've got on the side, it actually creates a seam and creates a new polygon. And every time you let go of the mouse and then click again, it creates new geometry. And so, and the other thing is you don't want to hover over the axes, or that's just going to move the plane. You actually just, with this tool, you're just off in space somewhere, and you just click and drag. And if you drag to the left, it's going to move to the left. If you drag to the right, it moves to the right. And for now, there's a couple ways we could potentially extrude this, right? The maximum offset that I can get is about 96 units. And so I'm going to go ahead and set this to 75-ish. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to let go, right? And so I've created this extrusion. And now what I need to do is I need to make this fit, right? And so to do that, what I can do is I can switch to the scale tool. So if I hit the letter T on the keyboard, and I'm going to switch back to all the views so you can see what's happening, even though it's going to be probably a little bit, you know, hard to see what's in here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this window so I can see what's happening. But so you can watch all different views. But so if I hover over the y-axis here and I click and drag, I can taper this down to fit the sides of this object. And if I go to my front view, and the front view is going to be really hard to see, I'm also going to go ahead and say, let's reduce this transparency as well. So I'm going to go to configure, and I'm going to set my transparency higher. And you'll see there's some issues here with how this geometry works. Now with this, if I scale this, right, it's going to, what's nice about this is it's not messing with that edge because I clamped those center points. And so I can tug this in a little bit, and I have no idea how far in. I'm just going to do it some so that when I go forward a little bit later, I can make these changes. So I've moved it in the forward view, and you can come up here to the top and see that I need to go in just a hair more. Right? Okay. All right. So you'll also see that all of these sides are kind of too far out, and we're going to talk about how to change those in just a second. But let's go ahead and continue to extrude down the nose of the X-Wing. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter D, and I'm going to stay in this view. And I'm going to click and drag, and when I do that, if I drag to the right, it's going to extend it forward. And again, I'm going to go as far as I can possibly go, more or less, and maybe a little less. And I'm going to go ahead and let go, and then I'm going to use my scale tools, and I'm going to go ahead and scale in this view and taper this in until it's on or near the edges of the cone, or sorry, of the nose of the X-Wing. I'm going to come back to my right view, and I'm going to scale it vertically down as well. And then I'm going to come back, and you'll see that I'm starting to get this shape of the ship. It's a little bit off still, but let's go ahead and I'm going to continue in the top view. I'm going to hit the letter D. And again, right, I don't want to click on this to extrude. I need to click off in space. I'm going to go ahead and extrude, and there's a lot of kind of strange geometry that happens here on the nose cone. And so for the time being, I'm going to see if I can, nope, I can't make it all the way. I'm going to just make it halfway through the nose here. I'm going to release, and then I'm going to use my scale tool. And there's some other tools we're going to use because, right, when I do this, there's this little bit of detail that gets lost here, and this edge actually comes up forward a little bit. But for now, that's going to work. I'm going to come back to this view. I'm going to hold down 1 and click and drag so I can actually see where I am. I'm going to hit the letter T to make sure I have scale selected. I'm going to pull this down a little bit. And you can see here as well, which is hard to do when I hover over it and it turns white. Right, but this nose cone is kind of an interesting shape, and we'll have to deal with that a little bit later. But for now, we're just going to finish off the nose cone. So I'm going to go ahead and hit D again. And I can either do it in this view or the side view. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to click and drag until I get to the tip. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter T for scale. I'm going to pull this down, and you'll see that, again, right, I'm losing some of the curvature there. And there's a couple different ways we can do it. We're going to use the knife tool to cut, and then use some selection stuff to do this. We could also extrude smaller pieces to give that, you know, to have more polygons there. But right now we're just trying to get the major parts of the shape out. And so you'll also notice, right, things are offset a little tiny bit. This is extending a bit beyond the nose, but really it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to go ahead and scale this down until it more or less aligns with the nose there. Okay, so now we've got these other areas where we kind of made a mistake, right, where it's too wide here. And so the question is, you know, how can we go in here and select what we need to select in order to bring this closer to the body of the X-Wing? And so the simplest way probably right now is to go in and be in Polygons mode, use the Live Select tool, and select this side polygon that's too far out and scoot that in a little bit. Now, the issue is that there's still this point here where we do have a seam, where we do have edges, but it's still too far out on this corner. And so the way that we can deal with that is by going to Points mode and making sure we uncheck Only Select Visible Elements in the live selection options. And if those have disappeared, you just click on Live Select again, or you hit the space bar twice. Because the space bar will jump to whatever tool you used previously and then jump back to live selection. And so then I can click and drag. I make sure both of those are selected. And now I can pull just these 2 points in. And likewise, this is, you know, technically a little bit too far in. So I can select those and just nudge them out a little bit more. Okay. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and extrude the back of the vessel. So I'm going to go ahead and select Polygons mode. I'm going to rotate my view here so I can select this back polygon. And then I'm going to zoom out a bit in the top view. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter D to extrude, and then click and drag. And again, I'm going to go back, if I can make it, right here where the wings begin. Right? This is a good natural place to stop. And that's one of the things that as you model more and you make mistakes, and you'll find, like, okay, where are the natural places that I would want a big chunk of like the ability to control the geometry, right? And so with this, you know, I could use scale at this point too. So I'm going to hit the letter T, and I'm going to go ahead and again adjust my transparency so I can actually see a little bit better. And I'm going to hover over the red axis, and I'm going to pull this out until it reaches the edges here, right? And so You know, ideally there's probably going to need to be another polygon seam here where I can snug it in a little bit, but we'll add that at a later time. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and check my side view. And everything looks good so far there. But however, this bottom, right, on the top it's fine. We're going to add some more polygons. We're going to cut this up at some point to make that detail happen. But the bottom is problematic. And so what we need to do is we need to rotate our view. Actually, we don't even need to rotate our view. All we need to do is go to points mode, hit the space bar so that we have our live selection. We're going to make sure we have only select visible elements off. Click off into somewhere into space, and then select this bottom corner here and drag this down until that edge more or less aligns with here. And this sticks this out a little bit further, but again, when we start making cuts to add the detail, we can fix that little issue. Actually, no, what we should do is we should actually go to here, and then we can adjust that a little later. This way, because we're going to extend this back, and it doesn't get any thicker than this point, so this just will save us a lot of work down the line. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Polygons mode, and you'll notice that it keeps the old selection, so that speeds things up a lot too. So I can hit the letter D. I can click and drag to the right. Yeah, it seems weird at first. You're like, oh, I should pull it the other way, but this is just the way it works. I'm going to go about, well, can I make it the whole way? No, I'm going to go about halfway through the body of the X-Wing. I'm going to move my view here so I can see this final part. And then, right, and this is pretty straight and linear, so I'm going to go ahead and click and drag again to pull this all the way out to the end of the ship. Okay, this is a really good time to save your work. So I'm going to go ahead and save my work. And so at this point we've made a very, very rough version of the X-Wing. And so some of the next steps we're going to have to do, it's not a cube in this direction. We need to start pulling things in, and we probably need to cut all of these polygons in half in order to pull out these other pieces. And once we do that, then we can start pulling the wings out from the body. The engines are going to be a separate model that will also symmetry. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So we've saved it. This is a good place to take a break. When we come back, we will begin to start adding more detail to the X-Wing.